Hey everybody, welcome to Tuesday. Yesterday's video resulted in some comments that went off in so many different directions that had nothing to do with the core content of the video that I actually realized, okay, we may have to talk about this stuff because obviously people are so affected by some of the surrounding issues that they can't actually focus on the core of the video, which was specific comments made by a specific person and whether they were factual or not. So, Feedback Friday is starting on Tuesday this week because there's just so much to unpack. And I think it's important. I think that if people in the instance based on some of the things they're saying, if they're willing to take the risk to leave a comment of this sort, it deserves attention. So if you agree and you believe in this sort of dialogue, help support this channel, become a monthly patron, patreon.com/LeannaK. So one of the major sort of tangents I noticed in the comments about the J.K. Rowling video was people expressing a lot of emotion, wounded emotion, regarding their experiences with people they perceive to be trans activists. And this idea that there's some sort of unique inherent problem with transgender activism that is unique in the history of social movements, that other social movements don't have people who are this bad. And I have thought about this a lot over the last, I guess it's like 5 years, because I will be the first one to admit my first experiences with trans activists, and I'll get to why I say this in air quotes in a bit, was bad. They just jump on you for asking questions. They, say a whole bunch of nasty things and then say it's not their job to educate you. Well, if you've got activist in your profile, yeah, it kind of is. That comes with the job. So don't adopt the moniker if you're not prepared to have the same conversation over and over and over again. Trust me, I've been there. But then, I got accused of being transphobic by certain people in the, Gamergate debacle. I got put on a block list just for following the wrong people. Some people tried to label me a transphobe during that experience and failed, which is interesting. But, I have my own share of bad experiences that I do not let color, for lack of a better term. I don't let sort of negatively impact my support I have for trans people's right to live with dignity and to affirm their self. And obviously this is just one issue that tangented off of this stuff. And I will be the first one to tell you guys, this stuff is complicated. When you get into issues of identity as opposed to issues of action, things get super messy because it's layers of unsettled things. When you get into issues of men who sleep with men or women who sleep with women, these are actions, right? It's not about who they are. It's about what they do. Now, some would say that being gay is a big part of their identity. Yes, that's true, but it does not require you to alter your body either, in various ways to be gay. Though some would argue that with some of the meat market practices that go on in some circles, but it's not inherent to the whole thing. What seems to really get people's hackles up is the pharmaceutical or surgical alterations to the body that come along with trans status, and this causes a lot of people to get in very defensive positioning, especially where children are involved. And I bring this up not to give you my views on all that. That's not important right now. I'm highlighting it as an indication of one of the reasons that discussions of trans rights and trans dignity become so freaking heated so fast. You know, it was actually a trans woman who said to me that you know, she wasn't even in favor of children transitioning because after a certain point, you're basically, you know, having a child who is under the age of consent for most other things decide that they were never going to be able to have biological children. And it was her opinion that it was too young to make those decisions. Now, again, that is somebody else's opinion, not mine. There are certain aspects of this, I'll tell you, I don't know. My personal opinion with this is we're not there yet. You know, when we can actually get transphobic violence down, when we can get proper identification on, you know, things like driver's licenses and all, you know, all this stuff was not an issue with gay rights except for marriage. And, you know, gay marriage was one of the most hotly debated, heated topics where some of you younger viewers won't believe me, but there were like nasty knockdown drag out fights among gay rights activists about whether we should be pushing for marriage in the first place, because marriage was a heteronormative construct. And like, those are some of the nastiest fights I saw when, you know, in the 90s when I was doing that stuff. And to me, I was always firmly on the people should be able to get married if they want to get married. It's to consenting adults. That was always my view because it's a right, you know. If somebody doesn't want to get married because, you know, they reject that entire paradigm, well, that's, you're not forced to get married because you can't get married, right? And that's, I think, the thing a lot of people don't quite understand about, you know, transitioning. A lot of people don't have what people say is the surgery, as if it's only one surgery. A lot of people don't. And part of the debate that I thought was very important to have is making sure that somebody, you know, could have a trans identity without having to sort of prove it with surgical intervention. But that seems to be where a lot of people get really hung up on stuff, is the surgical interventions. And on the one hand, yes, there is an element of every type of activism that goes too far. On the other, some people, I think, really don't realize how comments like that impact an affected person. You know, to boil it down to that is really difficult to be on the receiving end of. I'm just telling people this because, again, because of the topic. Some strong reactions that happen by trans people are not because they are bullies, are not because they have this authoritarian agenda. It's just, these are very tender personal things that, you know, cisgender people don't have to deal with. We take a lot of things for granted. Um, and, you know, I guess I'm kind of halfway there because when I was younger, I struggled with, being bad at being a woman. Um, and, there were times I wished I wasn't female, mostly around the 10th grade, there and abouts. Um, just felt like nothing suited me. But that, I later realized wasn't about what I felt my identity was. And it was more the constructs surrounding that experience, which we'll talk about tomorrow. Um, Today, I want to stick with this idea that there's something uniquely awful about trans activism. And because of my own bad experiences, it would be easy to say yes. But I've had bad experiences with the radical fringes of pretty much any movement. And it's like, am I responding to particularly bad elements of this particular movement? Or is it just bad luck? Or is it the reality that we have a gender performance thing going on? One woman I spoke to, trans woman, put it perfectly. She talked about the fact that even though she has all the issues surrounding being trans, she was raised with male privilege, and she still has to be reminded to, as she put it, share the sidewalk sometimes. And, no one speaks as eloquently about the different expectations regarding politeness, regarding assertiveness and or aggressiveness between, what's okay for a man to do and what's okay for a woman to do than a trans woman. Because they've had that journey of, getting very different reactions to responding to things the exact same way. And so, because it really seems like a lot of the heat surrounding this stuff is focused on trans women as opposed to trans men, trans misogynistic violence is a huge issue. For people who don't know what that means, it means violence committed against trans women because they are trans women, for various reasons. And if they're Black or Latina or, anything else, that's sort of got an extra layer there, it's worse. But it's impossible to remove the fact that women, myself included, get really badly socially punished when we communicate in ways that people perceive are more masculine than feminine. They don't see it that way. It's you're pushy, you're bossy, you're obnoxious, you don't know your place, you know, all that stuff. There's all the people don't realize they're doing it, but it's a real thing. And this is impossible to eliminate from the whole thing. But there is that fringe that does get extremely aggressive and, goes for the deplatforming, goes for the sort of cancel culture thing. Now, I can't say that being canceled, attempts at cancellation for transphobia, attempts at getting you fired for transphobia happen any more or less frequently than, say, accusation is racism. I mean, the guy who played Elongated Man on The Flash just got fired because of tweets he made before he joined the show. Not that long before they joined the show, but before he joined the show. And they had nothing to do with trans people. It was racism and a lot of misogyny, some homophobia, but nothing transphobic. And that was like immediate, like, boom, fired. So cancel culture is a thing for numerous transgressions. So you can't really say that trans activists are uniquely bad about that. What seems to really stick in people's craw, and this part I get, is the whole changing of concepts, changing of language thing. And with gay rights, we had pretty much only one concept we really needed to get people to change. It was the idea of marriage is between two people, not marriage between a man and a woman. And that was hard enough. With transgender stuff, with trans stuff, it's the concept of masculinity, the concept of femininity, the the whole pronoun thing. And at this point, I think we sort of get confused between trans people and non-binary people. Like, trans people don't use bespoke pronouns frequently. They're like, no, I'm a woman, not a man. I think people have an easier time with that, even though it sometimes takes a while to change the association in our brains. If you've known someone for years and you associate he with them, it's the same way, for a while after a person gets married and change their name, you're calling them by their pre-married name. And I say person, not women, because I know two men who changed their names. And I messed up with them too for a while. But after a while, it becomes common. You see it enough places. You hear it enough places. The association rewrites. But people really seem to chafe at this idea that gender identity is something beyond biology. And that we should recognize people based on the gender they are in their brains, not what their outward anatomy prescribes. Now, there's fair points on both sides of this one from a medical perspective. Part of the reason I support five genders, cis women, cis man, trans man, non-binary, is when it comes to, if you are unconscious and you get rushed into the hospital and you don't have a medical alert bracelet, doctors have to know what they're getting if they have to perform surgery or they have to give you medication. And if you are on hormones, if you have had certain surgeries, these are important things they need to know so they don't accidentally kill you through ignorance. And I want to get to a point where trans women can be as valid an identity as any other qualifier on womanhood, black woman, white woman, Latina, Jewish woman, Christian woman, Muslim woman, Buddhist woman. It's just descriptions, but we're all women in that context. And so that way, if, being a trans woman is just accepted, we don't have to worry about that, because then all those medical issues stop. They can openly be trans, and all those problems are not problems. And there can be designations on driver's licenses and, anything like that. Passports not necessarily as important because those don't tend to be pulled, but maybe. I mean, you can have an X gender or an O gender on some passports now, so why not? Any identifier that helps good medical outcomes is a good thing. But before you get mad at me, I recognize we're a long way from that. And we still live in a world where seeing that on someone's license, which with interactions with police, this is coming up a lot, could result in more negative outcomes. And so, we're in this messy um, messy in-between stage of activism where the long-term ideal outcome can get somebody badly hurt in the short term. And so we've adopted this sort of mantra of trans women are women that people react very badly to. And I say this because I'm asking people to please, before you judge somebody else as being overly aggressive, or, unreasonable or trying to cancel you or all that stuff, please be aware of how you're coming across, because I've seen some very well-meaning people just continue to make the same offensive mistakes over and over and over again, and they're oblivious, and it doesn't help. Now, this is all preamble to admit that there are some issues that are real with unfinished civil rights work in other areas, like crashing into trans advocacy. And, these issues, that there has to be sensitivity for everybody. That, let's face it, somebody who was raised with the benefits of masculine socialization, I partially got that, so I can speak from my father did everything he could do to raise me like a boy, because I think he wanted a boy, and I was the oldest, and my sister was much more of a girly girl, so guess who got it? But what that means is I speak up for myself. I put myself forward. Pick me, that kind of stuff. I make myself seen. I make myself heard. A lot of cisgendered women are not socialized to do that. And it's an issue that is not fair to just say, well, speak up more. Because, when someone's had 25 years of gendered social programming and they step out in the world and try to get a job, you can't change 25 years of programming overnight. And so there are issues of, perception of advantage of, you can check the box that you're a woman, but you've got all these advantages regarding socialization, so you have an unfair advantage. I'm less worried about that than the reality that a truly inclusive workplace recognizes that trans women and cisgendered women are not interchangeable any more than women of different races are or different religions are, and that a properly run company should try to include as many different types of people as possible. But especially media companies where experience and sensitivity is so super important, and yet they're still oddly dominated by white people who went to, the same 6 schools. So what happens is you've got these sort of incomplete social progress movements here, and then you've got this new one that clashes with a lot of the rhetorical stuff that past movements use to get ahead, who don't have proper equality yet, and now here's this new group going, well, you have to consider us too. And this happened before with the Lavender Menace in second wave feminism, and a lot of prominent feminists, Betty Friedan first and foremost, were very hostile to the idea of including lesbian issues in advocacy for women for various reasons. Now, she later in life admitted she was wrong, admitted she was on the wrong side of that one. And I suspect that quite a few people will recognize they've been on the wrong side of this one in 10 years from now. But that being said, there is definitely an issue with certain sub-communities online having particularly bad interactions with trans activists, and it pushing them either to be hostile when they previously weren't, or they just shut up. They don't want to talk about it. They won't advocate because they're likely to be wrong. They won't get it perfect, and so they'll get pilloried, and they don't want that. And whenever you're taking potential allies and turning them either into bystanders or worse, antagonists, that's a real problem. And I don't quite know what to do about that, other than for me to continue to, to advocate based on what I know and what I think, and offer my voice and set an example of, I'm not going to let those people who, I'll save this. I'll save what I was about to say. Stick a pin in that. I'm not going to let the overly aggressive, abusive people online stop me from saying what I believe. Because I know what I believe isn't hateful. I know what I believe is supportive. And if you want to try to cancel me, plenty have tried before you. I'm still here. Now to get to that thing, my last point where I was getting to. I do not believe a lot of these people are true altruistic activists. The people who are just bludgeoning people online with identity politics. I don't. Every movement does get people who use something rights-oriented to self-aggrandize, to get attention for themselves, to get an easy shortcut to things like funding and attention and status and jobs and things like that. Often these people have some sort of antisocial personality disorder or something like that, aka they're sociopaths. They exist. They're real. A step down, narcissists are real. They exist. And any type of person can be a narcissist, though it pops up or it's identified in some groups more than others, but it's possible for anybody to be one. To me, that's what those people going around being horrendously hostile to people who just don't know yet and are interested in knowing. I had a thing with a guy on Twitter a couple days ago where he wouldn't refer to trans women as women and kept saying, they're men who became women. And I'm like, stop saying that. And he says, why? And I said, because they were never men. They were assigned men at birth. But just the same way somebody can't turn gay, you don't become, a woman or become a man if you're trans. You always were. You just needed, some extra steps to affirm that. And sometimes it takes you a while to figure it out. And he said, that's the clearest anybody has explained this to me. Thank you. And I just sent him a SpongeBob SquarePants yay meme, because that was progress. And I don't expect the guy to become a big trans advocate. But, it's a start. And if I just wrote the guy off and didn't continue to talk to him, there couldn't have been that little tiny breakthrough, for whatever it means. And that's what advocacy really is. If you care about a cause enough to put yourself out there on that point, it's not just about platitudes. You actually do have to go out and explain things like that to people and be able to explain your position. And if you won't or can't, then you're not really an advocate. You're just somebody making noise. And I guess we could say there's a difference between an activist and an advocate. I suppose that's a distinction, we can make. But the truth is, a lot of people screaming and yelling and hollering about any issue don't really understand the issue. God, I've spent 6 years trying to unpack feminism for people because of that, because I've had so many people just scream at them who don't know what they're talking about. They haven't done the reading. They don't understand the theories. They don't really know what they're talking about. And, a lot of people have become major members of this community who started off with an overall bad opinion because we had those discussions and they were allowed to speak as well as sit there and just shut up and not so much listen, but just don't speak, right? Or don't type. Just say nothing. That's wrong. That doesn't change any minds. So I totally understand why people think that um, trans advocacy has a uniquely hostile streak. Um, I personally think that may have more to do with bad luck, the role of social media, but also there just seems to be a lot specifically of that sort of hostility in the gaming community. So overall, I will not agree. Within gaming, yeah, I think there's a unique issue. Now, it might just be that there's just enough people to make enough noise. A big problem we have in gaming is that with a lot of social issues, there just aren't enough people with the capacity to speak who are given a platform to even get heard or noticed or anything. Um, so you're not imagining it, but please don't let it take you away from trying to understand the perspective of people who have a very different relationship with their identity and a very different path to coming to terms with their identity than you do. Because I'll tell you, once you learn how to think that way, a lot of other things make a lot more sense. And I'll leave it there. You know, respect and good vibes to everybody. Momo hugs if he was here. He's not here. If you like this sort of content, help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Patreon.com/AshleyNK. Thanks for watching.